So when I work with tarot cards or imagery cards or something like Dixit or this deck that I'm going to be using today, this is called, I guess, Dreamland. It's by Metafox, and they call them postcards for contemplation. I got this because I kind of like, I guess they're like postcards. Of course, I don't use them as postcards, but they kind of remind me of a little bit of like Dixit style imagery. I guess this just has a bunch of them, but kind of like surreal and kind of strange imagery that I think can be really evocative in various ways. So I'm going to try out these as I demonstrate or go through this video. But yeah, the other benefit to using something like Dixit or something like this is that they don't necessarily, or they don't have prescribed meanings. Like, you know, you use tarot, and tarot generally has a lot of specific meanings that are attributed to the cards, or like an oracle deck will have a guidebook, but something like this doesn't come with a guidebook. And so whether I'm using something like this or something that is more prescriptive like tarot, I don't really work with them necessarily as having one fixed meaning. I do sometimes like to pull from other sources or even read the guidebook, maybe just to kind of like augment my own interpretation or exploration, but really kind of prioritizing my own intuitive reaction and response to the imagery. And one way that I kind of explore that inner personal reaction is exploring them from different angles and from different perspectives. And so one framework that I find really helpful to do that is, it's called dramatic resonances, which comes from the work of drama therapist Susanna Penzick. It was originally introduced to me in my graduate training as kind of a way to explore and interact with written material. So I use it kind of as a bunch of different ways to work with an image, or you could also use it with text, but I primarily use it with imagery right now. So this isn't meant to be like a full, you know, the one way of reading tarot or imagery. It's just one way of slowing down and kind of sitting with or exploring a card kind of on multiple different levels, right? And so the idea here is that, like, if you're doing a tarot spread or some kind of a spread or a card pull, like, instead of just, you know, pulling a card and rushing to interpret it, what does this mean? You know, reaching for your guidebook right away. It's more about kind of staying with the image for a few moments and looking at it in different ways. So if we take like a single card or like a card pull, you know, and the other thing is that this way of sitting and exploring an image can be a practice in itself, right? So maybe you just, you know, have your daily card pull practice and you choose, you know, one or two dramatic resonances to kind of just, you know, as a way to kind of guide journaling, or to kind of look at, to use as like a framework for exploring the image and like kind of interacting with it in a way. But it can certainly also be built into a larger practice, almost maybe as like a first step to kind of orienting where the personal meaning of the image is coming from, right? So if we pull a single card, let's pull this one. If we have this one, this boat in these like reeds and stuff. There's like backpacks, some kind of like lantern I can see. But instead of like just being like, what does this mean? You know, what does it mean that I pulled this card today or right now? Or what is kind of like, how is it resonating with me, you know, on my inner realms, like in this moment, right? And so using dramatic resonances, there are a couple different ways to answer that and to explore that. So one way is literal observation, and this is a really great starting point. It's just kind of like, you know, sitting with what is like literally in the image, right? So colors, figures, objects, the setting, just the description, right? Just, you know, there's a boat, there's a figure in it with their back, you know, to the observer. It looks like lily pads, you know, so just literally exploring like what is in the image. Another one is like the emotional tone, right? So what kind of feeling or atmosphere does the image have? Not what does it mean, but like what does it feel like, right? If you were in this image, like how would that actually feel? To me, there's this sense of like separation, cold, loneliness. That was just my initial like reaction or response to this image. And you can like combine them, right? So if I was working with this one, I just want to, you know, go through different images just to kind of, not just, I mean, you could certainly do all of these with one image, but just for demonstration purposes, I'll try to move through different images. But just as an example, you know, this, to me, this image has a very different emotional tone than this one, even though interestingly, they are both figures who have their back towards the observer, right? Another one is perspective shift. So what if you focus on a small or less obvious detail in the image, right? So here, if you can see, there's like two figures in the boats, but maybe it's about exploring the perspective of the darkness. Maybe it's about exploring the perspective of, I guess, like the moon up here or one of these lily pads. So instead of just, you know, thinking about a small or less obvious detail and what that detail might be aware of, right? And this is kind of getting into a more playful stance with it, right? So we can even like personify the darkness, right? Like now we're giving it a voice and a perspective, okay? Another one is narrative extension. So what might have been happening, you know, if this is like a snapshot, what happened just before this moment, right? Like what, you know, was this a conversation with two people? Who are these people? What might happen like in the next moment? Almost thinking of this as like part of, you know, like a comic book. Like what was the panel right before? There's this one, what's the next one? The next resonance is personal resonance, right? So thinking about, you know, does anything in the image connect to a personal experience or a memory in some way, right? It's not about forcing meaning. It's just about noticing what might echo, right? And particularly with something like personal resonance, if you go through the preceding ones, now you're kind of getting at this other layer that might not have been immediately accessible. I think about dramatic resonances kind of as like modular building blocks. Both resonances in general, like I was saying, can be built into a larger practice. But even within the collection or the set of dramatic resonances, the more we like go through them, it's almost like hitting on different, deeper layers. Okay. So the next one is like wider association. So this is connecting the imagery to, you know, if it reminds you or brings up like a story or some kind of a myth or a song or an archetype or some kind of a cultural image. So connecting to the image to something larger that has more significance. It could be culturally, within your community, something like that. Okay. Oh, and one other really important dramatic resonance that I forgot to mention is framing, right? So this is about enclosing the image in a larger landscape. So zooming out, thinking about it as like a story in a story, like thinking about what's the larger story or context that this image is embedded in. And this is a really important way to work with imagery, particularly if we are going to go into world building and role playing, because this is really a fun and this is like the basic building block of world building, particularly if we have an image that is a little bit more like unusual, right? Like this rabbit in some kind of a boat, you know, with the moon, right? Also, this just made me think of cultural resonances with this too. But in any case, if we were going to like specifically world build around this, like, you know, what kind of a world could this exist in, right? So that can be a really fun way and a really great foundational way to go into world building. So what I really find useful about this type of approach is that it's a really powerful way to like slow down our interpretation, right? Oftentimes I see, like, particularly in tarot books, like layouts, spread layouts, and like, you know, this card is, you know, the past and this one is the future. And then it's like, well, what does it mean? And instead of rushing to guidebooks, something like a dramatic resonance process allows you to stay with the image long enough for different types of meanings, like beyond, you know, what the guidebook says or what the traditional meaning is, something that's more personal to you to emerge, right? And not always necessarily one specific answer that's fixed, but more like multiple possible angles of engagement, right? So if this type of exploration is interesting to you, I do run a free weekly writing circle called Myth and Mirror, where we work with lots of different types of prompts and inner imagery and reflective practices like this in a group format. So if you're interested in that, the link is below.